We get expelled from our true affective center. Our internal object world gets fractured. Our self concept was being held together in the relationship by the shared fantasy, co opted by the narcissistic interject. We are looking at ourselves through the gaze of our narcissistic partner. Our self concept is not real. It's been co constructed by the shared fantasy. It's a hall of mirrors, from idealizing mirroring, libidinal, to punitive shaming and self destructive mirroring, anti libidinal. When the discard happens, our internal object world goes into an orbital collapse. The hall of mirrors stays within the survivor's mind, like another psychic dimension, a transference of the shared fantasy. The ongoing reflections of I'm worthless, unlovable, to blame, etc., are relentless. This means the mirrors have become reflexive. We are now living with a split maternal introject that represents the narc's false self and their punitive vision of mother. It's a simulation within a simulation. The voices we are hearing is the internal conflict of the narcissist. It is the narcissist collapse being lived out by the survivors. Let's break this down. We get expelled from our affective center. What this means: the affective center is the grounded core of the self, our emotionally attuned, embodied, relational identity. In a narcissistic relationship, we are dislocated from it. Instead of regulating our internal world, we become regulated by the gaze of the narcissistic other. This echoes Schore's right brain rupture, affective dysregulation, and Fairbairn's loss of the central ego, where the authentic self is fragmented under relational duress. Our internal object world gets fractured. What this means: we carry internal representations of self and other objects, shaped from childhood and reaffirmed in adult relationships. Narcissistic abuse splinters these representations, often reactivating early maternal wounds. This marks the onset of orbital collapse. The ego structure starts to spin out of symbolic gravity, unable to hold coherent internal forms. Our self concept was being held together by the shared fantasy. What this means: we didn't just fall for a narcissist, we built a self inside their fantasy. Our identity was scaffolded by their projections. That identity disintegrates when they withdraw. This is the moment of mirrored psychic inversion, where the survivor's sense of self was co constructed through projection and then co opted by the narcissistic introject. We are looking at ourselves through the gaze of our narcissistic partner. What this means: our self worth becomes externally regulated, not by inner truth, but by how the narcissist sees us. This gaze is conditional, distorting, and lethal to identity. And then the theoretical echo. This is rooted in Lacanian mirror stage theory and also echoes Sam Vaknin's Hall of Mirrors. The self cannot perceive itself except via the other's gaze, now turned toxic. Our self concept is not real. It's been co constructed by the shared fantasy. What this means: the survivor's personality has been co authored by a fantasy. It was not nurtured but simulated. When the fantasy collapses, so does the false self. The clinical application here. This explains why survivors feel identity loss post discard. Their ego scaffolding was symbolic, not secure, hence the existential terror during collapse. from idealizing mere libidinal to punitive anti-libidinal. What this means, the narcissist reflects your ideal self and then replaces it with their punitive internal world. You absorb both without consent. From a psychodynamic lens, this aligns with Fairbairn's libidinal and anti-libidinal ego structures and Vaknin's concept of inverted empathy. It also underlies trauma bonding. When the discard happens, we go into an orbital collapse. What this means is the fantasy ends, the narcissist retracts all cathexis, psychic investment, and the survivor's internal world enters collapse. This is depicted in the orbital collapse diagram in embodied, where the ego structure spirals inward, severed from relational anchors. The whole of mirrors stays within the survivor's mind. What this means, even after discard, the internal simulation continues. The survivor replays the narcissist's voice, gaze, judgments, all now turned inward. The clinical parallel, this is internalized symbolic repetition, a trauma loop. You are not reliving the relationship, you are reliving its structure. The mirrors have become reflexive. What this means, self is now trapped in a self-looping feedback system. There is no longer a narcissist present, but the fantasy still runs inside. This marks the emergence of reflexive mirrored psychic inversion, RMPI. The survivor becomes host to the narcissist's fragmented self. We are now living with a split maternal interject. What this means, the internal mother becomes split, part nurturing, part cruel, and represents the narcissist's internal chaos. This is the true inheritance, a borrowed psychic wound. For theoretical context, this fuses Kernberg's split object, Vaknin's persecutory mother, reject colonization. It's a simulation within a simulation. What this means, you are now playing out their fantasy within your internal world. It's not your voice you're hearing, it's theirs. And the symbolic insight, this is pure narcissistic infection. The survivor has symbolically inverted and now lives inside a collapsed psychic reality. The voices we are hearing is the internal conflict of the narcissist. What this means, the survivor becomes the carrier of the narcissist's on process collapse. It is no longer projection, it's possession. On a clinical note, this is introjective transference at its most severe. The narcissist's persecutory objects are now alive in the survivor's mind. It is the narcissist collapse being lived out in the survivor. This means the final and devastating truth. The narcissist cannot metabolize their own collapse, so they outsource it to you. Input anchor. This is collapse reversal. The narcissist offloads their fragmentation. The survivor becomes the site of borrowed ruin. Peace out. Loads of love.